Part 1. Swipe right into destiny. The notification popped up on my wrist display, just as I was trying to explain to a Sathari merchant why human-made stress balls weren't actually edible. Living on Kestrel Fold Station had its moments. But being a cultural attaché meant I spent most of my time preventing interspecies incidents that ranged from mildly embarrassing to potentially war-starting. "Adrian Cole, you absolute coward," my colleague Jake shouted across the crowded bar later that evening. The nebula's edge was packed with off-duty personnel from a dozen different species, the air thick with recycled atmosphere and the competing scents of various intoxicants. "You promised you'd try it." I nursed my synthahol and tried to look dignified. "I said I'd think about it." "You said," and I quote, "If I have to explain one more time why humans don't molt their skin annually, I'll download that stupid app." Jake's grin was insufferable. "Well, buddy, I counted 3 skin molting conversations today alone." The app in question was Starcross, which everyone called Space Tinder, despite the developer's insistence it was a sophisticated xenocultural compatibility matrix. Right. It was a dating app that matched beings across species lines, and it had become the station's favorite source of gossip, drama, and occasionally, actual relationships. "Fine," I said, pulling up my personal interface. "But when I match with some silicon-based life form that communicates through interpretive crystallization, you're explaining it to the diplomatic corps." The app downloaded in seconds. Its icon a stylized double helix wrapped around a heart. Subtle. I flicked through the setup process, answering questions that ranged from basic, preferred atmospheric composition, to bizarre, "How do you feel about consuming food that's still partially conscious?" "Ooh, set your radius to maximum." Jake leaned over my shoulder. "Go big or go home." I obliged, watching as profiles began populating my screen. A Thraxian fighter pilot who enjoyed long walks in zero-G and dismantling my enemies. Pass. A hive mind collective looking for someone who understands the beauty of distributed consciousness. Definitely pass. Then I saw her profile. Princess Talea Soren. The hollow photo showed an Aurelian woman with the characteristic silver-blue skin and those impossibly deep eyes that seemed to hold stellar formations. But it wasn't her obvious beauty that made me pause. It was her bio. Xenobiologist/reluctant royal/part-time revolution starter. Looking for someone who can explain why humans put pineapple on pizza and won't faint when I mention my 17 doctorates. Must appreciate terrible puns and be willing to overthrow at least one oppressive system per solar rotation. No consciousness purists, please. I stared at the screen. This had to be a joke profile. Nobody actually put revolution starter in their dating bio. The compatibility rating glowed at the bottom, 99% xenocultural compatibility. "Holy fusion cores," Jake whistled. "She's perfect for you. Swipe right. Swipe right now." "She's obviously trolling," I protested. 17 doctorates, come on." "So what you spent last week coding a virus that makes all the station's auto-translators replace distinguished colleague with pompous windbag. You're both trolls. It's destiny." My finger hovered over the screen. What the hell? It wasn't like an actual Aurelian princess would be on Space Tinder anyway. Their species was notoriously traditional about courtship rituals. I swiped right. The match notification was instant. Not just a match, but a diplomatic compatibility alert. My wrist display started pulsing with official seals I had only seen on high-level communiques. Jake," I showed him the screen. "What's a diplomatic compatibility alert?" His face went pale. Oh shit, Adrian. I think that's actually her. Actually her." Before I could process this, another notification appeared. An invitation for casual refreshments to discuss mutual interests in xenocultural exchange. Tomorrow. 1400 hours. Conference room 7. The one with the observation dome that visiting dignitaries used. "I'm going to die," I said flatly. "I'm going to accidentally cause an interstellar incident and die." "You're going to be fine," Jake said, though he was already pulling up his own interface, probably to check the station's emergency evacuation procedures. "Just don't mention the pizza thing. Aurelians take food very seriously." The next day found me standing outside Conference Room 7, wearing my least wrinkled formal attaché uniform and trying not to hyperventilate. Rook 42, the station's most sarcastic logistics droid, wheeled past and paused. "Biological stress indicators suggest imminent panic response," he observed in his perpetually dry tone. "Shall I alert medical?" "I'm fine, Rook." Lying to a droid. How very human. He continued down the corridor, muttering about organic inefficiencies. I pressed my hand to the door sensor. It slid open to reveal not the intimate meeting I'd expected, but a room filled with nearly 3,000 beings. Holographic displays floated everywhere, showing what looked like compatibility algorithms, gene sequences, legal documents in 17 different languages. At the center of it all stood Princess Talea Soren. She was even more striking in person, wearing a simple research coat over traditional Aurelian robes. She looked up from a heated discussion with what appeared to be a team of xenobiologists and lawyers, and her face lit up with a grin that was surprisingly mischievous. Adrian Cole. She strode over, and I noticed she moved with the controlled grace of someone who'd had combat training. The human who thinks stress balls might be the key to universal peace. "I've read your cultural incident reports. They're hilarious." "You've read my reports," I managed. "Of course. Anyone who can turn a near-catastrophic misunderstanding about ritual combat into a station-wide bubble wrap appreciation day is exactly the kind of creative thinker we need." She gestured at the chaos around us. "Welcome to what might be the strangest coffee date in xenocultural history." "This is a coffee date." "Well, it started that way. Then my legal team insisted on attending. Then the xenobiology department heard about our compatibility rating. Then somehow the Intersystem News Network got wind of it. And—" She shrugged apologetically. "Aurelian bureaucracy. We don't do anything small." A severe-looking Aurelian man in elaborate robes pushed through the crowd. "Your Highness, we cannot proceed without proper biological compatibility screening. The political implications alone." "Minister Krav." Talea's voice could have frozen helium. "The screening is a formality. The political implications are my concern. And if you interrupt my coffee date one more time, I'll recommend you for that cultural exchange program with the methane breathers on Titan Station." The minister retreated, muttering about protocols and proprieties. "Sorry about him," Talea said, turning back to me. "So, shall we scandalize some bureaucrats and actually have that coffee?" We found a quiet corner where someone had thoughtfully set up a small table with various caffeinated beverages. I chose something that looked safely like Earth coffee. She selected a glowing blue concoction that steamed in patterns. "So," I said, trying to ignore the weight of 3,000 eyes on us. 17 doctorates. 18. Actually, finished my comparative xenoneurology degree last week." She sipped her drink and made a face. "Ugh. Note to self, never let the chemistry department cater. So, pineapple pizza. It's a human thing. We put fruit on bread with cheese and meat. It's either genius or insanity, depending on who you ask. Fascinating. My people ferment their fruit for 30 cycles before considering it edible. We might have to find a middle ground." Her eyes sparkled with humor. "Though I suppose finding middle ground is what this whole thing is about. This whole thing being—" She gestured at the chaos around us. "Would you believe me if I said I just wanted to meet someone who wouldn't bore me to tears at state dinners?" "Honestly, yes." That earned me a genuine laugh. "You really did read my profile. Most beings see princess and their brains shut down. Do you know how refreshing it is to match with someone whose first message was a taxonomy joke? It wasn't that good a joke. It was terrible. I loved it. She leaned forward conspiratorially. Want to know a secret? This whole diplomatic screening thing. It's because our match triggered something in the old protocols. Apparently, a 99% compatibility rating between human and Aurelian hasn't happened since the lattice gates were first activated. The lattice gates have compatibility protocols. Everything has compatibility protocols when you're dealing with my people. We over-engineer redundancies for our redundancies. She paused, studying me with those impossible eyes. But there's something else. Something the ministers don't want to announce until they understand it better. A warmth spread through my left wrist where my civilian implant sat. Not painful, just present. Like it was suddenly aware of itself. Your implant, Talia said softly. It's reacting to the proximity protocols. Adrian, when did you last update its firmware? Last month, there was some kind of humanitarian patch. I was helping with refugee logistics, and they pushed through an emergency update for all civilian volunteers. Her expression shifted to something between excitement and concern. Show me your update log, please. I pulled up the data, projecting it between us. She scanned through the code faster than any human could have, her fingers dancing through the holograms. Oh, clever, she breathed. Oh, that's very clever indeed. She looked up at me. Adrian, do you trust me? It was a hell of a question from someone I'd met 5 minutes ago. But something in her expression, a mix of scientific excitement and genuine concern, made the answer easy. Weirdly enough, yes. Good. Because what I'm about to suggest is either going to be the best or worst decision of our lives. She stood up, raising her voice. Minister Krav, clear the room. We're proceeding with the biological handshake protocol. The minister sputtered. Your Highness, without proper preparation. The preparation, Talia said firmly, was completed the moment Mr. Cole volunteered for refugee assistance. Unless you're suggesting our humanitarian protocols are flawed. That shut him up. The room began clearing, though I noticed several recording devices remained active. Whatever was about to happen, it would be documented thoroughly. Biological handshake, I asked as we moved to the center of the room, where a medical scanner had been set up. Think of it as the ultimate compatibility test. Our species developed it during first contact protocols. It's completely safe, just intense. She placed her hand on the scanner. It maps biological signatures, checks for pathogen compatibility, and establishes a baseline for xenogenetic interaction. Very clinical. Very boring. Except when two beings have a compatibility rating over 95%. Sometimes, the old systems wake up. The lattice gates were built by our ancestors when they were much more optimistic about interspecies cooperation. They embedded certain protocols we're still discovering. I placed my hand next to hers on the scanner. The moment our skin touched, the warmth in my implant became a symphony. Not sound, exactly, but information flowing in patterns I could almost understand. The room erupted in alerts. Holographic displays showed DNA helixes intertwining, probability matrices calculating, and something else. Something that looked like gate coordinates, Talia whispered. That's not possible. The Confluent Steward protocols have been dormant for centuries. Confluent Steward. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. The data stream was intensifying. My budget implant handling information flows it was never designed for. Except it was handling them. As if someone had very recently upgraded its capabilities far beyond civilian specifications. Ancient protocols for managing the lattice gates. Pairs of different species who could work in harmony too. She trailed off, staring at the displays. Oh no. Adrian, look at your wrist. I looked down, where my skin met hers. A pattern was forming. Not a tattoo, Exactly. But a shifting design that seemed to exist just beneath the surface. The confluence mark. My upgraded implant supplied helpfully. Well, I said, trying for humor despite the magnitude of what was happening. I guess we're going steady now. Talia burst out laughing, even as the ministry's representatives began shouting about precedents and protocols. Going steady. We just accidentally got married by about 6 different legal systems, and possibly gained administrator access to the transit network that holds civilization together. But sure, let's call it going steady. To be fair, I said, watching the mark settle into its final pattern. This is still less complicated than my last relationship. Human humor as a stress response. I've read about this. She squeezed my hand, and I felt the connection pulse between us. Not romantic exactly, but something deeper. Partnership, trust, shared purpose. Adrian Cole, I think we're about to have a very interesting life together. An urgent alert flashed across every display in the room. The Latticegate network had registered new stewards for the first time in 300 years. Across known space, every transit fee calculation was being flagged for review. Minister Krav looked like he was about to have a mechanical failure. The Spindle Consortium will not stand for this. Chancellor Draith will... Chancellor Draith, Talia said with a smile that was all teeth, is about to learn why my dating profile mentioned overthrowing oppressive systems. Adrian, how do you feel about redistribution of transit resources? I thought about the refugee ships I'd helped coordinate, how they'd been forced into expensive circuitous routes because direct paths were premium lanes. I thought about water haulers paying fortunes in transit fees while entire systems went thirsty. I think, I said slowly, that someone needs to update the fee structure, maybe add a humanitarian discount. A humanitarian discount. She turned to face the recording devices, still holding my hand. Let it be recorded that the first act of the new Confluence stewards will be to review all transit fees affecting essential resource distribution. The lattice gates were built to connect us, not bankrupt us. The room exploded into chaos. Ministers shouted, lawyers frantically pulled up precedents, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear Rook 42 announcing evacuation procedures with what sounded like glee. So, I said to Talia as the storm raged around us, this coffee date is going well. She grinned. Wait until you meet my parents. Mother's going to have opinions about me pair bonding with someone who puts fruit on pizza. Pair bonding. The implant helpfully provided a full biological and social analysis of Aurelian mating customs. Oh, that's comprehensive. Don't worry. The actual family planning protocols don't kick in unless we both consent to them. Although, she glanced at one of the displays showing our biological compatibility. 99.7% reproductive viability. That's actually unprecedented. I decided not to think about that too hard. One crisis at a time. A communication request blazed across the main screen. Chancellor Magus Draith himself, looking like he'd been carved from ice and disappointment. Princess Soren, his voice could have frozen plasma. This unauthorized activation of defunct protocols is a direct threat to established order. You will report to the High Council immediately. I'll report to the High Council when I'm done with my date, Talia replied calmly. Adrian and I still haven't discussed his comedy routines. Apparently, he does stand up about bureaucratic incompetence. I think you'd hate it. The Chancellor's face went through several interesting color changes before the connection cut. Did you just hang up on one of the most powerful beings in known space? I asked. Technically, he hung up first. Also, you do comedy. Amateur night at the nebula's edge. Mostly jokes about mistranslation incidents, and why humans are the only species that thinks making animal noises at pets is normal communication. I have to see this. She finally let go of my hand, and I immediately missed the connection. But first, we should probably deal with the small matter of accidentally becoming the most controversial couple in 3 galaxies. As if on cue, my personal communicator exploded with messages. Jake's was just a string of exclamation marks followed by, "Dude, you matched with actual royalty and broke the gate network." "Any regrets?" Talea asked, watching me scroll through the increasingly hysterical messages. I thought about it. In the space of an hour, I'd gone from bored cultural attaché to half of the first confluent steward pair in centuries. I was probably going to be sued, definitely going to be investigated, and potentially going to upturn the entire economic structure of interstellar travel. "Nah," I said. "But next time, we're using a different app." Her laugh echoed through the conference room, bright and genuine. Outside, the stars continued their ancient dance, oblivious to the chaos below. The lattice gates pulsed with new awareness, waiting for their stewards to decide what came next. And somewhere in my upgraded implant, beneath the avalanche of new protocols and responsibilities, a small subroutine calculated the probability of successful long-term partnership. The number made me smile. 99.7% was pretty good odds, all things considered. Part 2. The Aperture Tithe Game and Refugee Wave. The emergency session of the Transit Authority convened at 0600 station time, which meant I'd had exactly 3 hours of sleep, punctuated by increasingly urgent messages from Earth's diplomatic corps. Talea met me outside the council chambers, looking surprisingly fresh for someone who'd spent the night reviewing 3 centuries of dormant gate protocols. Coffee. She offered me a thermos of something that glowed faintly purple. "Is it safe for human consumption?" "Mostly. The mild hallucinations wear off after an hour." She grinned at my expression. "Joking. It's basically concentrated caffeine with a protein stabilizer. You'll need it." I took a careful sip. It tasted like lightning feels, if that makes sense. "So, what's our strategy? Please tell me you have a strategy." "Observe, document, and try not to accidentally revolutionize interstellar commerce before lunch." She pulled up a holographic display showing the current gate network. "Although, given what I found last night, revolution might be unavoidable." The display showed thousands of transit routes crisscrossing known space. But something was wrong with the pattern. Whole sectors showed red, indicating restricted or premium-only access. The refugee corridors I'd worked with were pushed to the edges, forced into loops that added weeks to critical supply runs. "The aperture tithes," I said, recognizing the bottlenecks from my logistics work. "Exactly. Every gate transition requires a fee, supposedly for maintenance and security. But look at this." She zoomed in on a busy junction. "Station Gamma 6 processes 10,000 transits daily. At current rates, that's nearly 1 billion credits. Their actual maintenance budget 2 million annually." "Where does the rest go?" "That's the trillion credit question. The Spindle Consortium controls 60% of major gates. They claim operational costs, but their financial records are sealed under corporate privacy laws." She closed the display as other delegates began arriving. "Adrian, what do you know about water rights on Earth?" Random question. But okay. Water access is considered a fundamental human right. Hoarding or price gouging during shortages is illegal across all nations. Interesting. Because water haulers from the ice mining operations are paying 30% transit fees on essential supplies. During a drought crisis affecting 12 systems, her eyes had gone hard. The consortium is treating survival as a luxury commodity. Before I could respond, the chamber doors opened. The Transit Authority Council was already in session, a horseshoe of representatives from various species and corporations. At the center, Chancellor Draith presided like winter personified. "The newly activated stewards will present themselves for verification," he announced without preamble. We walked to the center of the chamber, our footsteps echoing in the vast space. I felt very aware of the confluence mark pulsing gently on my wrist, hidden under my formal jacket sleeve. Princess Talea Soren of the Aurelian Hegemony and Mr. Adrian Cole of Earth. Draith's voice could have frozen fusion reactions. Your unauthorized activation of steward protocols has disrupted critical infrastructure. Explain yourselves. Talia stepped forward with the bearing of someone who'd been trained for confrontation since birth. With respect, Chancellor, the protocols activated themselves. We merely participated in a standard compatibility screening. A screening initiated through a civilian dating application. Someone from the Spindle delegation interjected, "This trivializes sacred institutions." Does it? I found myself speaking before my brain caught up. Because from where I'm standing, a dating app just revealed that your sacred institutions have been running on autopilot for 3 centuries, while people die waiting for water shipments. The chamber erupted. Half the delegates shouted about protocol breaches. The other half demanded clarification. Through it all, Draith watched me with calculating eyes. Order, his voice cut through the chaos. Mr. Cole raises an interesting point. Perhaps he would like to elaborate on his expertise in gate logistics. It was a trap, obviously, but Talia caught my eye and nodded slightly. For the past year, I've been coordinating refugee convoys from the Persian climate disasters, I said, pulling up my own data display. Ships carrying emergency supplies, medical personnel, and evacuees. Standard humanitarian stuff. Except every route had to be approved through Spindle's premium assessment process. I projected the route maps. This is the direct path from the aid stations to the refugee camps. 18 hours. This is the route we were actually allowed to take. The projection showed a twisted path that looked like someone had tied the line in knots. 96 hours. The difference about 40 million credits in transit fees per convoy. The premium routes ensure security and efficiency. A Spindle representative protested. Really? Because I have the efficiency reports right here. I pulled up another display. Premium routes show a 0.2% improvement in transit stability. The algorithm seems more interested in maximizing fee collection than optimizing travel time. These accusations are baseless, Draith said coldly. The fee structure has maintained order for 300 years? Yes, we know. Talia interrupted. The same 300 years the steward protocols have been dormant. Curious timing. Wouldn't you say? She gestured, and the chamber's central display shifted to show historical data. The last active stewards were removed from their positions in 23A7 shortly before the Spindle Consortium received its first exclusive gate management contracts. The official record claims they retired voluntarily. Ancient history, Draith dismissed. Is it because the confluence mark on our wrists is pulling data from that era? Would you like to know what it's found? She didn't wait for an answer. Gate transit used to be free for essential supplies. The aperture tithe was implemented as a temporary measure during the Reconstruction Wars. Temporary, Chancellor, that was 3 centuries ago. A murmur ran through the non-consortium delegates. I noticed several were pulling up their own historical databases, frowning at what they found. Furthermore, Talia continued, the original gate builders included specific protocols for steward pairs, not individual authorities, but pairs. Do you know why? Draith's jaw tightened. Enlighten us, Princess. Because the gates respond to biological harmony. They were designed to be managed by beings who could bridge differences, who represented cooperation between species. The confluence isn't just about authority, it's about trust, something that seems to be in short supply these days. Pretty words, Draith said. But the reality is that your pairing threatens established contracts worth trillions of credits. The economic disruption alone would be less than the economic disruption of 12 systems dying of thirst, while water haulers circle in holding patterns they can't afford. I cut in. I've run the numbers. Would you like to see them? Before he could respond, alerts began flashing on every console. Emergency broadcasts from the outer systems, where the refugee crisis was hitting hardest. The images were devastating camps running out of water, children sick from rationing, Aid ships floating just outside gate ranges they couldn't afford to cross. "Turn it off!" someone demanded. "No," Talia said quietly. "Let them see. This is what your fee structure costs in real terms. Not credits. Lives." The footage continued. I recognized some of the camps I'd helped plan their supply routes. Watched them get rerouted again and again as fees climbed. Each face on the screen was a failure of the system I'd been trying to work within. The steward protocols exist for exactly this reason, Talia continued. When the system fails its people, the gates themselves provide a correction mechanism. We didn't seek this authority. It sought us. Because you gamed the system with a dating app. The Spindle representative was practically screaming now. "No," I said, understanding hitting me like cold fusion. "Because I've been working with refugees, and she's been studying xenobiology. Because we both saw the cracks in the system and tried to help. The gates didn't pick us randomly. They picked us because we already cared." My implant pulsed, and suddenly, I could feel the gate network like a living thing. Each node hummed with potential, constrained by artificial barriers that had nothing to do with physics and everything to do with profit. "You know what," I continued, riding the wave of comprehension. "You're right about one thing. We are going to disrupt your contracts. Starting with humanitarian corridor designations. Every route carrying essential supplies, water, food, medical equipment gets recategorized. Flat rate, cost of maintenance only." "You don't have that authority," Draith snarled. Talia smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Actually, we do. Section 15, subsection C of the original Gate Compacts. In times of humanitarian crisis, steward pairs have emergency override authority for route designation. Would you like me to read the full text? It's quite comprehensive. The consortium will challenge this in every court." "Good," I said. "Court proceedings are public record. I'm sure the 12 billion beings currently affected by the water crisis would love to hear Spindle's lawyers explain why their suffering is necessary for profit margins." That's when things got interesting. A new voice joined the chamber feed, not a delegate, but a journalist. Pax Arden's distinctive green hair filled a corner of the display, broadcasting live from a refugee camp. "This is Pax Arden with Breaking Helix News, coming to you live from Camp Threshold where wait. What the Transit Authority is in emergency session, and there are new stewards." She grinned at the camera. "Folks, you're about to witness history. I'm patching into the public feed now." Draith moved to cut the connection, but Talia was faster. "Under transparency protocols, any session discussing humanitarian crises must be open to public observation. You wrote that law yourself, Chancellor, after the food riots on Kepler Station." His face could have been carved from nitrogen ice. Around us, more feeds began connecting. Not just news outlets, but individual citizens, refugee organizations, independent traders who'd been crushed by fees. The viewing counter climbed past 1 million, then 10 million, then kept going. "Since we have an audience," I said, feeling reckless, "let's talk about what's really happening here. The Gate Network was built as a gift to all sapient beings, a way to unite us across impossible distances. Somewhere along the way, it became a toll booth, and not just any toll booth, one that charges extra for desperation. I pulled up specific examples. Transport ship Mercy's Wake, carrying antibiotics to plague victims on Theron Colony. Delayed 72 hours in fee negotiations. Death toll increased by 30%. Cargo hauler, free water, loaded with ice for drought refugees. Rerouted 16 times to avoid premium lanes. Lost half their cargo to sublimation. Each example hurt to read. These weren't statistics. They were failures I'd personally tried to prevent. Working within a system designed to extract profit from misery. But here's the thing about the gates. Talia picked up seamlessly. They're not just transit points. They're living technology, quantum biological hybrids that respond to intent. And right now, they're responding to ours. She gestured, and every gate in the network flickered on the display. Just for a second, but long enough for everyone to see. The confluence isn't just about authority, she continued. It's about connection. Adrian and I, human and Aurelian, different species with different perspectives, but united in purpose. That's what the gates want. That's what they were built for. Enough, Drath stood, his composure finally cracking. This session is adjourned. All steward claims will be subject to full review. Actually, a new voice said from the entrance. I think we should hear more. Meera Patel entered the chamber like she owned it, which in a diplomatic sense, she kind of did. Earth's senior negotiator had a reputation for being tougher than hull plating, and twice as flexible when needed. Counselor Patel, Drath managed, this is an internal transit authority matter. Is it because it looks like a humanitarian crisis affecting multiple Earth-allied colonies? That makes it very much my business. She moved to stand beside us, a subtle but clear gesture of support. Also, I've been reviewing some interesting documents. Did you know Earth never formally agreed to the current fee structure we've been operating under protest for 60 years? All members ratified? Under economic duress? Hard to negotiate when you're threatened with transit isolation. Mira's smile was sharp enough to cut steel. But that's a conversation for another day. Right now, I move that the steward claim be recognized pending full review, with provisional authority granted for humanitarian route designation. Seconded, said a voice from the Cathari delegation. Thirded, added the Persian representative, who looked ready to cry with relief. The motion is out of order, Drath insisted. The motion, Talia said quietly, is the only order in this room. Call the vote, Chancellor. Unless you'd prefer to explain to 100 billion viewers why you're blocking humanitarian aid on procedural grounds. The viewing counter had passed 100 billion. The refugee camp feeds showed crowds gathered around screens, watching their fate being decided in real time. Children holding empty water containers, medical staff rationing supplies, engineers calculating how long their life support would last. Drath looked around the chamber, reading the room with the skill of a career politician. The non-consortium delegates were united for the first time in decades. The public was watching, and two newly minted stewards stood at the center of it all, backed by Earth's most dangerous diplomat and the weight of moral authority. The vote will be called, he said finally, each word pulled from him like teeth. All in favor of recognizing provisional steward authority. Hands rose around the chamber. Not all Spindle's block held firm, but enough. More than enough. Motion carried, Drath announced. The stewards are recognized, pending full review in 30 standard days. Humanitarian route designations may be adjusted during this provisional period. The chamber erupted again, but this time with celebration from some quarters, furious protest from others. Through it all, I felt Talea's hand find mine, the confluence mark pulsing between us. We did it, I said, hardly believing it. We started it, she corrected. This is just the beginning. They'll fight us every step of the way. Good thing we have backup. I nodded to Meera, who was already coordinating with other delegations, and to the screens where Pax Arden was interviewing refugees about what the vote meant for their survival. Speaking of backup, Talia said thoughtfully, how do you feel about meeting my extended family fair, warning there are a lot of them? They all have opinions, and at least 3 will try to challenge you to ritual combat. After today, bring it on. I squeezed her hand, feeling the connection pulse between us. But first, we have humanitarian routes to redesignate. How many do you think we can push through before they find a legal challenge that sticks? Her grin was pure predator. All of them. We're going to redesignate every single humanitarian route in the network. And then, we're going to look at medical transports, educational exchanges, and refugee relocations. They'll hate us. They already hate us. Might as well earn it. She pulled up the gate network again, this time with administrative access. Ready to save some lives, partner. Partner, I repeated, liking the sound of it. Yeah, I'm ready. We worked through the day cycle and into the night, redesignating routes with the focused intensity of people who knew lives hung in the balance. Every approved change sent ripples through the network. Water haulers suddenly found their transit times cut by 80%. Medical ships reached quarantine zones, while their supplies were still fresh. Refugee convoys moved through corridors that had been premium only for decades. The Spindle Consortium filed 17 different legal challenges in the first 6 hours. Mira swatted them down like insects, citing precedents I didn't even know existed. Pax Arden kept broadcasting, showing real-time footage of aid finally reaching desperate camps. The public response was overwhelming. But it was Rook 42 who provided the most unexpected support. The logistics droid rolled into our temporary command center around midnight, his optical sensors glowing with what I could only describe as satisfaction. Biological entities require rest, he announced. Also, you might be interested in these efficiency reports I've compiled, purely for archival purposes, of course. The reports showed exactly how much the consortium had been overcharging, down to the credit. Centuries of accumulated profit extracted from suffering, all documented with mechanical precision. Rook, I said slowly, how long have you been collecting this data? Since my activation. I am, after all, a logistics droid. Inefficiency offends my core programming. He paused. Also, several of my fellow units have been destroyed for reporting discrepancies. I thought it best to maintain backup files. You're a revolutionary, Talea said with delight. I am a droid who appreciates functional systems. The current system is decidedly non-functional. He projected more data. You might also appreciate knowing that there are 15,847 other logistics units across the network who share my concerns. We have been discussing options. The implications hit me like a gravity well. The droids are unionizing. Collective bargaining is an organic concept. We simply share data and reach consensus on optimal solutions. His optical sensors shifted between us. Your confluence authority could facilitate significant improvements in system efficiency. He means, Talea translated, that the droids want in on the revolution. Correction, we want functional transit networks that prioritize cargo delivery over profit extraction. Revolution is merely the most efficient path to that goal. I laughed, exhaustion making everything seem surreal. Sure, why not? We've got refugees, journalists, diplomats, and now droids. Anyone else want to join the Make Transit Make Sense coalition? Actually, Pax Arden's voice came through the comm. I've got about 3,000 independent traders who'd like a word. Turns out, they're tired of losing cargo to artificial delays too. And that's how day one of our Provisional Steward Authority ended, with a growing coalition of everyone the current system had failed. United by the simple idea that space travel shouldn't bankrupt the desperate. Of course, Draith and the consortium weren't going to accept defeat gracefully. As I finally collapsed onto a cot in the early morning hours, my implant buzzed with an encrypted message. The sender was anonymous, but the content was clear. Enjoy your victories, stewards. They'll be short-lived. The Purity Charter hasn't been invoked in centuries. But perhaps it's time to remind the galaxy why some traditions exist. I showed it to Talea, who was somehow still awake and reviewing legal precedents. The Purity Charter, she mused. Haven't heard that mentioned outside of historical texts. It's something about maintaining species boundaries in critical infrastructure. Sounds ominous. Everything about Draith sounds ominous. It's his primary personality trait. She set aside the documents and sat on the edge of my cot. Adrian, there's something else. The confluence mark isn't just administrative access. It's changing us on a biological level. Small adjustments to optimize our compatibility. Nothing harmful, but But it means our pairing is permanent. The gates have decided we're a matched set. Whatever happens next, we face it together. I thought about being permanently linked to an alien princess, with 17 18 doctorates, and a revolution habit. I can think of worse fates. Romantic. I'm swooning. But she smiled as she said it. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we meet with the refugee representatives to plan Phase 2. Phase 2. Opening the archived gate construction data. If we're going to fight the consortium properly, we need to understand how the gates actually work. And that means accessing databases that have been sealed since the last stewards were removed. They're not going to like that. They're going to hate it, she corrected cheerfully, which is half the fun. As she headed to her own cot, I reflected on how much had changed in 48 hours. From swiping right on a joke profile to reshaping interstellar transit policy, my mother always said I had a talent for overcomplicating things. The confluence mark pulsed gently on my wrist, a constant reminder of the connection between us. Not just romantic, though there was definitely something there, but deeper. Partnership in the truest sense. Two people from different worlds, united in the conviction that the universe could be better than it was. The revolution, as it turned out, would be crowdsourced, droid-supported, and broadcast live across the galaxy. And it started with Space Tinder. Sometimes, the universe had a sense of humor after all. Part 3. The Binding Ceremony and Gate Network Access. The formal confluence binding ceremony was scheduled for the 10th day of our provisional authority, which gave the consortium exactly enough time to file 43 legal challenges and launch a media campaign painting us as reckless opportunists endangering galactic stability. Their latest vid featured ominous music and cherry-picked footage of gate fluctuations that had nothing to do with our route adjustments. They're really going all out, I said, watching the propaganda piece in our shared office. We'd commandeered a section of the station's administrative wing, turning it into a combination command center and legal war room. Talia looked up from the ancient gate technical manual she'd been studying. My favorite part is where they imply our biological compatibility might create hybrid monstrosities that threaten pure bloodlines. Yeah, about that. I rubbed the back of my neck. Your family's response has been interesting. Interesting was an understatement. The Aurelian royal family had split into 3 factions, those who saw our pairing as evolutionary progress, those who viewed it as ancestral betrayal, and Talea's grandmother, who'd simply sent a message saying, "Finally, someone interesting in the bloodline," along with a crate of ceremonial weapons. "Mother's coming around," Talea said optimistically. "She only threatened to disown me twice in our last call. That's progress." "And your father?" "Father's a xenobiologist like me. He's mostly excited about the potential genetic data." She paused. "Though he did ask if you'd be willing to provide tissue samples for his research. I told him that was a 3rd-date conversation minimum." I laughed, despite the stress. We'd been so busy fighting legal battles and redesigning transit routes that we'd barely had time to explore whatever was growing between us. The confluence mark created a constant awareness of each other, not quite telepathy, but a sense of emotional resonance. When she was frustrated, I felt it like a discordant note. When I made her genuinely laugh, it resonated through the connection like music. "Speaking of dates," I said, "after the ceremony, assuming we survive it and Draith doesn't find a way to have us arrested, would you like to have dinner, actual dinner, not emergency nutrition paste between crisis meetings?" She smiled, and I felt warmth pulse through our connection. "Are you asking me on a real date, Adrian Cole?" "I figure we should probably have at least one before the eventual hybrid monstrosities." "Romantic and practical. I accept." She returned to the manual, then frowned. "Adrian, look at this." The page showed gate schematics from the original construction era. The technology was bewilderingly advanced. But one thing stood out. Every major gate hub had something called a confluence chamber built into its structure. They're not just administrative positions. Talea said slowly. The stewards were meant to physically interface with the gates through these chambers. That's why the pairing is biological, as well as political. Interface how? That's the question. The manual talks about harmonic resonance and paired consciousness navigation. It sounds almost like... She stopped, eyes widening. Like they want us to merge consciousness with the gate network. Before I could process that terrifying possibility, Meera Patel swept in with her usual perfect timing. Good. You're both here. We have a situation. When don't we have a situation? I asked. Fair point. But this one's special. Draith's invoked something called the Heritage Review Board. They have the authority to delay the ceremony if they can prove cultural incompatibility between bonding participants. Let me guess, Talea said dryly. They've discovered humans and Aurelians have incompatible values. Oh, it's better than that. They're claiming that human humor is fundamentally incompatible with Aurelian ceremonial dignity. Mira's expression suggested she was both annoyed and slightly amused. They've cited your comedy routines, Adrian, as evidence of chronic irreverence unsuitable for sacred responsibilities. I blinked. They're trying to disqualify me because I tell jokes. Specifically, they've taken issue with your bit about bureaucratic inefficiency and your impression of a Thraxian trying to use voice-activated controls. Mira pulled up the legal filing. They claim it demonstrates a fundamental inability to respect institutional gravitas. Talia burst out laughing. That's the most ridiculous weight. Her expression shifted to calculating. This is perfect. How is this perfect? I asked. Because the Heritage Review Board has to hold public hearings. They've just given us a platform to demonstrate that human humor isn't irreverence, it's a coping mechanism that builds bridges between species. She turned to me with a grin that was slightly terrifying. Adrian, how do you feel about performing your routine in front of the board? You want me to do stand-up comedy at a legal hearing? I want you to be yourself, she said. Show them that laughter doesn't diminish dignity. It makes it bearable. Besides, half the galaxy's watching our every move. Let's give them something worth watching. Which is how I found myself 3 days later, standing before the Heritage Review Board. 5 ancient beings from various species who looked like they'd never experienced joy in their extensive lives. The chamber was packed with observers, media drones hovering like mechanical vultures. Pax Arden had a front-row seat, her green hair practically glowing with anticipation. Mr. Cole, the board's chief arbiter intoned, you stand accused of chronic irreverence incompatible with the sacred duties of a confluent steward. How do you respond? I looked at Talea, who nodded encouragingly, then at Mira, who seemed to be fighting a smile. Even Rook 42 had wheeled in to watch, his optical sensors expressing what I could only interpret as mechanical anticipation. Your Honors, I began. I'd like to tell you about my first day on Kestrel Fold Station. I was fresh from Earth, ready to promote human culture and build bridges of understanding. My first assignment: explaining to a Sithari merchant why humans shake hands instead of exchanging crystallized thoughts. You know what I told him. The arbiters waited with expressions of profound skepticism. I said humans shake hands because we're checking if the other person is hiding any weapons, food, or comedy material. He laughed so hard, he accidentally grew 3 new pseudopods. I paused for timing. Turns out, laughter is universal, even if the biology isn't. A ripple of amusement went through the crowd. The arbiters remained stone-faced, but I caught one's antenna twitching the Rillan equivalent of suppressed laughter. You see, I continued, warming up. Humans use humor for everything. We laugh at danger to make it smaller. We laugh at authority to make it human or, relatable to whatever species is wielding it. We laugh at ourselves most of all, because if you can't find the absurdity in your own existence, you're missing the best joke in the universe. This is precisely the irreverence we're concerned about. One arbiter interrupted. Is it, or is it honesty? I pulled up a holo display. Let's talk about the aperture tithes. For 3 centuries, beings have been dying because moving through space costs too much. That's not dignified. That's not sacred. That's a joke. Except nobody's laughing because the punchline is measured in graves. The chamber went very quiet. But here's the thing about humans and humor. I continued. We don't joke about things that don't matter. We joke about death because we fear it. We joke about love because we need it. We joke about bureaucracy because I looked directly at the arbiters. Because sometimes the only way to deal with a system that's forgotten its purpose is to remind it how absurd it's become. You claim humor serves a purpose, the chief arbiter asked. I'll do you one better. I'll demonstrate. I took a breath, falling into my performance rhythm. So a human, an Aurelian princess, and a logistics droid walk into a gate chamber. The human says, I'm here for the cultural exchange. The princess says, I'm here for the science. The droid says, I'm here because you organisms keep trying to optimize systems with emotions instead of algorithms. Rook 42's optical sensors flashed. That is accurately characterized. The crowd chuckled. Even some of the arbiters seemed to be fighting smiles. Now here's where it gets interesting, I continued. They all want the same thing, a functioning transit system that serves people instead of profit. But they can't agree on methods. The human suggests negotiation. The princess recommends systemic reform. The droid calculates that the most efficient solution is to let organic beings exhaust themselves arguing while it quietly reprograms everything. I have never proposed such action, Rook 42 protested, then added quietly, out loud. Now the laughter was spreading. I could feel Talea's amusement through our connection, warm and encouraging. But here's the punchline, I said. They're all right. Negotiation, reform, and efficient systems, you need all three. Just like you need different species working together, each bringing their strengths. And yes, sometimes you need someone willing to point out that the emperor has no clothes. The gate fees make no sense, and the Heritage Review Board hasn't reviewed its own heritage in so long, they've forgotten that even the most sacred traditions started as someone's crazy idea. You dare, one arbiter began. I dare to suggest that dignity isn't about never laughing. It's about knowing what's worth taking seriously. And what's worth taking seriously right now isn't whether I tell jokes. It's whether we're going to let people keep dying for the sake of profit margins wrapped in ceremonial tradition. I stepped back, suddenly aware I'd been pacing the chamber like it was a comedy club stage. The silence stretched, taut as a gravity field. Then the chief arbiter did something unexpected. She laughed. Not much, barely a chirp by Valen standards, but definitely laughter. Your point is adequately made, Mr. Cole, though your humor could use refinement. Everyone's a critic, I said, and the dam broke. The chamber filled with various forms of laughter, human giggles, Sathari harmonics, Rillan antenna vibrations, even what might have been amusement from the normally stoic Thraxian observer. However, the chief arbiter continued, once order was restored. This hearing has raised legitimate concerns about the ceremony itself. The confluence binding is traditionally a solemn affair. How do you propose to balance human irreverence with Aurelian ceremonial requirements? Talia stood, moving to join me at the center. With respect, arbiter, you're asking the wrong question. The ceremony isn't about human or Aurelian traditions. It's about creating something new. The confluence represents unity between differences, not erasure of them. The princess speaks wisdom, another arbiter acknowledged. But practical concerns remain. The ceremony requires precise harmonic resonance. Emotional instability could disrupt the binding. Then it's fortunate, Talea said, taking my hand. That human humor actually stabilizes emotional states. Adrian's ability to find lightness in darkness doesn't make him unsuitable for the confluence, it makes him ideal. The gates were built by beings who believed in connection across impossibility. What's more impossible than an Aurelian princess and a human comedian finding common ground? Through our joined hands, I felt the confluence mark pulse with warmth. The arbiters must have seen something in the visible energy between us, because their expressions shifted from skepticism to something like wonder. "The ceremony will proceed," the chief arbiter announced, "with one condition: the humans. Performance has demonstrated that tradition must evolve. The confluence binding will be public, broadcast across the network, allowing all beings to witness this new form of unity." I felt my stomach drop. Public as in billions of viewers watching you try not to crack jokes during a sacred ceremony, Talia whispered, squeezing my hand. No pressure. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Traditional Aurelian ceremonies involved a lot of harmonic resonance crystals, ceremonial robes that seemed designed to trip the wearer, and vows in ancient Aurelian that I practiced until my throat was raw. Meanwhile, Earth's diplomatic corps insisted on adding their own touches, an exchange of water from Earth's oceans, readings from humanity's various wisdom traditions, and, because someone in the cultural department had a sense of humor, a ceremonial joke exchange. They want me to tell a joke during the ceremony. I stared at the amended program. Apparently someone argued that humor is humanity's highest cultural achievement, Mira said dryly. I tried to suggest music or art, but the motion had already passed. What kind of joke? One that represents the best of human humor, while respecting the gravity of the occasion. She paused. Good luck with that. The night before the ceremony, I couldn't sleep. The weight of what we were about to do, not just the personal commitment, but the political implications, felt heavier than a gas giant's gravity well. I found myself wandering the station's observation deck, staring out at the stars. Second thoughts, Talea's voice came from behind me. Third and fourth thoughts, I admitted. This morning I was a mid-level cultural attaché, whose biggest worry was explaining human dietary restrictions. Tomorrow, I'll be half of the first interspecies confluence pair in 3 centuries, with the power to reshape galactic transit policy and really piss off some very powerful beings. She moved to stand beside me, her presence warm against my shoulder. You could walk away. The binding requires full consent from both parties. Could you? No, she said simply. Even if we weren't already marked, even if the gates hadn't chosen us, I'd still be here, because someone needs to stand up to the consortium, and apparently the universe decided it should be a xenobiologist with too many degrees and a comedian who can't resist a punchline. We're going to change everything, I said quietly. Yes. She turned to face me, her eyes reflecting the starlight. Adrian, I need you to understand something. The binding isn't just ceremonial. It will deepen our connection. We'll be able to feel each other across any distance, share thoughts and emotions more directly. It's intimate in ways humans might not be prepared for. And if I said that terrifies me, but I want it anyway, then I'd say you're exactly the partner I hoped for. She smiled, soft and genuine. Also, my grandmother sent another crate of weapons with a note saying, in case the human needs to defend his honor. I think she likes you. She hasn't even met me. No, but she's watched your comedy routine 17 times. She particularly enjoyed your impression of Thraxian mating dances. I'm going to die of embarrassment before the consortium can assassinate us. See humor as a coping mechanism. She took my hand, the mark warming between us. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. Even if you do crack a joke during the solemn vow section. I make no promises. We stood there watching the stars, our joined hands pulsing with potential. Tomorrow would bring the ceremony, the deepened connection, and whatever countermove Draith was planning. But tonight, we were just 2 people from different worlds, finding comfort in each other's presence. Adrian, Talea said softly,
Yeah.
That dinner you mentioned after tomorrow. I want to go somewhere that serves both human and Aurelian food. I want to argue about flavor profiles and texture preferences. I want to have the kind of normal couple problems that don't involve galactic commerce or political upheaval. Deal, I said. Though, given our track record, we'll probably accidentally revolutionize the restaurant industry. One revolution at a time, she laughed, and I felt it through our connection like starlight made sound. The ceremony day dawned with all the fanfare the galaxy could muster. Ships from 100 worlds gathered around Kestrel Fold, their viewing screens aligned to catch every moment. The station's largest ceremonial hall had been transformed into a fusion of human and Aurelian aesthetics crystals, harmonizing with earth flowers. Water features flowing around holographic star maps. I stood at one end of the hall in robes that somehow managed to be both dignified and comfortable. A minor miracle of cross-cultural fashion. Jake was there as my witness, looking slightly pale but determined. Rook 42 had appointed himself as ring-bearer, despite no rings being involved in the ceremony. Rings are symbolic of unbroken connection, he'd argued. I have crafted superior alternatives. The alternatives turned out to be matching probability calculators that would sync our decision-making algorithms. It was weirdly touching. The music began a harmony of earth strings and Aurelian resonance chimes that shouldn't have worked but did. The doors opened, and Talea entered. She wore traditional Aurelian ceremonial dress, layers of fabric that shifted between colors, like deep ocean currents. But she'd added human touches, a crown of earth flowers, jewelry that incorporated both species' designs. She was radiant, and through our connection, I felt her nervous excitement matching my own. Citizens of the galaxy, the officiant began, their voice carrying across countless screens. We gather to witness something unprecedented, a confluence binding between species. A union that represents not just two individuals, but the possibility of unity across all differences. The ceremony proceeded through traditional elements from both cultures. We exchanged water from our respective worlds. We spoke vows in multiple languages, promising to bridge differences with understanding, to face the unknown with courage, and to always remember that the universe was vast enough for all beings to thrive. Then came the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating, the cultural expression exchange. Talia went first, performing a traditional Aurelian light weaving that told the story of first contact between our species. Her movements created patterns in the air that lingered like solid things, beautiful and complex. Then it was my turn. I stepped forward, aware of billions watching, and took a breath. There's an old human saying, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. 2 weeks ago, my plan was to avoid responsibility and maybe get a date through an app. The universe had other plans. A ripple of amusement went through the hall. But here's what I've learned, I continued. The biggest joke isn't that a human and an Aurelian matched on Space Tinder. It's that it took an app to do what should have happened centuries ago, bring different species together as equals, as partners, as friends who can laugh at the absurdity of existence while working to make it better. I looked at Talea, letting everything I felt show in my expression. So here's my promise. Witnessed by the galaxy, I will always find reasons to laugh, especially when things seem darkest. I will use humor to build bridges, not walls. And I will never let ceremony become more important than compassion, or tradition more valuable than truth. And if sometimes I make terrible puns during diplomatic dinners, or accidentally insult someone's ancestor by comparing them to Earth fauna, well, I shrugged. At least life will never be boring. The laughter that filled the hall was warm and genuine, and even the most dignified attendees seemed to relax. This was what the confluence meant, not perfect harmony, but the willingness to embrace differences. The final part of the ceremony required us to interface directly with the confluence chamber, hidden within the station's core. As we placed our joined hands on the ancient interface, I felt the connection between us deepen and expand. Suddenly, I could sense the entire gate network like a living thing. Each node pulsed with life, with the hopes and fears of billions of beings trying to cross impossible distances. And underneath it all, a presence that felt old and patient and amused. The gates remembered their purpose. Through our connection, I felt Talea's wonder matching my own. We were part of something larger now, stewards not just in title but in truth. The network recognized us, welcomed us, waited for us to remember what had been forgotten. When we emerged from the chamber, officially bound, the first thing I noticed was Draith's expression in the crowd. He looked like someone who'd bitten into fruit and found it rotten. The second thing I noticed was the message alert flashing on every screen in the hall. Someone had just activated something called the Purity Charter, and gate traffic was beginning to slow. "So much for our honeymoon," I muttered. Talia laughed, bright and fearless. "Did you really think they'd give up so easily? Come on, husband. Let's go save the galaxy, again." As we walked hand in hand from the ceremony hall, bound by choice and purpose and something deeper than either, I reflected that my life had taken a decidedly unexpected turn. But with Talea beside me and the universe watching, I couldn't imagine wanting it any other way. The revolution, it seemed, would be televised, harmonized, and occasionally punctuated by terrible puns. Just the way it should be. Part 4. The Public Hearing and Legal Revenge. The emergency session convened within 6 hours of the Purity Charter activation. By then, gate traffic had slowed to a crawl, with species verification protocols creating bottlenecks at every major junction. Ships carrying mixed species crews found themselves stuck in holding patterns, while automated systems tried to calculate purity percentages. "This is insane," I said, watching the traffic reports from our command center. Through our deepened connection, I could feel Talea's anger like a cold fire. "They're literally segregating space travel." "It's worse than that," Mira said, pulling up legal documents that looked older than some star systems. The Purity Charter was written during the Separation Wars, when species were actively trying to avoid contact. It classifies any mixed species cooperation in critical infrastructure as a contamination risk. "But the wars ended 500 years ago," Talea protested. "The charter was never officially repealed. Just ignored. Until now." Mira's expression was grim. "Draith's arguing that your confluence binding represents exactly the kind of contamination the charter was meant to prevent." Rook 42 wheeled in with what I was learning to recognize as his urgent bearing. "Statistical analysis indicates a 43% increase in transit delays. Medical supply ships are being prioritized for purity screening. 3 have already reported critical cargo degradation." Through the windows, I could see protest crowds gathering on the station's public levels. The mix of species that made Kestrel Fold vibrant was exactly what the charter targeted. Families were being separated at departure gates. Business partners were being told their contracts violated species interaction guidelines. "He's using bureaucracy as a weapon," I said, understanding hitting me. "Draith knows he can't directly revoke our steward status, so he's making the entire system unusable." "Inefficient," Rook 42 corrected. "The system remains functional. It simply now requires 17 additional forms per transit." Talia stood abruptly. "We're going to the emergency session, all of us." "Princess, that might not be wise," Mira cautioned. "The public attention is exactly what we need." Talia's eyes blazed with determination I could feel through our bond. "They want to use ancient laws. Fine. Let's show the galaxy exactly what those laws mean in practice." The council chambers were packed beyond capacity. Every major news outlet had sent representatives, and Pax Arden had somehow secured a position directly behind the steward seats. She gave us a thumbs up that managed to be both encouraging and slightly manic. Draith stood at the central podium like winter personified, his pale blue skin almost translucent under the harsh lights. The activation of the Purity Charter is a necessary response to unprecedented contamination of our most critical systems. The so-called stewards represent exactly the kind of species mixing our ancestors wisely sought to prevent. Your ancestors, someone shouted from the gallery, were xenophobic warmongers. Order, the current session chair demanded. I didn't recognize her, a Velen administrator who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Chancellor Draith has the floor. Thank you, Draith continued smoothly. The evidence is clear. Within days of their irregular binding, these stewards have disrupted centuries of stable commerce. They've encouraged mass violations of established transit protocols. They've even suggested opening classified gate construction data to public access. Because people are dying, I said, loudly enough to carry. Or does the Charter have provisions for that too? Mr. Cole, you will have your opportunity to speak, the chair said wearily. The human makes my point, Draith said. Emotional decision-making, disregard for protocol, the elevation of individual suffering over systemic stability. These are the precise dangers the Charter was designed to prevent. He gestured, and the main display filled with images that made my blood run cold. Refugee ships backed up at checkpoints. A Rillan child separated from her human adoptive parents. A mixed-species medical team prevented from reaching a plague outbreak because their contamination rating was too high. You see, Draith's voice dripped satisfaction. This is what happens when we allow sentiment to override sense. When we permit mixing in critical roles. I felt Talea's hand find mine, our combined anger threatening to overflow. But she squeezed gently, a reminder to be smart, not just right. The Charter is clear, Draith continued. Critical infrastructure must be managed by single-species teams to prevent the chaos we now witness. I move for the immediate revocation of all mixed-species authorities, starting with the so-called confluence stewards. Seconded, came a voice from the spindle section. The floor recognizes Princess Talia Sorin, the chair announced with obvious reluctance. Talia stood slowly, and I felt her pulling our shared connection into something like armor. Chancellor Draith speaks of contamination. Let me tell you what I see contaminating our systems. She gestured, and the display shifted to financial records. In the past decade alone, the Spindle Consortium has extracted over 12 trillion credits in excess fees from refugee transports. They've delayed medical shipments an average of 72 hours to maximize premium routing charges. They've classified water as a luxury good subject to tertiary taxation. These are established commercial practices, Draith began. These are crimes, Talia cut him off. Crimes wrapped in bureaucracy, justified by policies written in fear and maintained by greed. She pulled up more data. You want to talk about the Charter? Let's talk about Article 9. Draith's expression flickered. Just for a second, but I caught it. Article 9, Talia continued, states that in times of humanitarian crisis, Charter provisions may be suspended by a 2/3 vote of affected populations. Shall we poll the 12 billion beings currently stuck in your purity checkpoints? That provision requires a formal census, Draith said. Such a process would take 17 minutes, Rook 42 announced. Everyone turned to stare at the droid. I have taken the liberty of coordinating with logistics units across the network. Real-time polling is already in progress. Current results show 91% support for Charter suspension. The chamber erupted. Draith supporters shouted about illegal polling, while others demanded to see the results. Through it all, I felt a strange warmth from our connection. Talia was proud of Rook. Furthermore, I said, standing to join my wife, let's discuss the legal framework for mixed-species governance. Councillor Patel. Mira rose with the kind of smile that made opposing lawyers reconsider their career choices. Thank you, Steward Cole. The Galactic Accord of 2387 signed, I might add, by Chancellor Draith's own government explicitly supersedes the Purity Charter in matters of humanitarian cooperation. The accord applies only to emergency situations, Draith protested. You mean like 12 billion beings facing transit delays during resource shortages? Mira pulled up the legal text. Or medical teams being prevented from reaching plague zones, or children being separated from their families based on genetic percentages. She paused, letting the weight of each example sink in. Every activation of the Purity Charter creates its own emergency. The law defeats itself. Clever wordplay, Draith said. But the Charter remains active until formally. Actually, Pax Arden's voice cut through the chamber. That's not entirely accurate, she stood, her press credentials glowing. Breaking Helix News has just received leaked documents from inside the Spindle Consortium. It seems the Charter activation wasn't just about mixed-species governance. The main display shifted to show internal Spindle communications. My enhanced implant translated them in real time, and what I read made my anger crystallize into something colder. They're planning to use the delays to force a market restructuring, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Create artificial scarcity, drive up prices, then offer expedited pure species routing at premium rates. These documents were obtained illegally. Someone from Spindle shouted. These documents were provided by whistleblowers within your own organization, Pax corrected. Beings who believe profit shouldn't come before lives. And speaking of which, she smiled. We're going live in 3, 2. Her broadcast feed appeared on screens throughout the chamber. But she wasn't alone. Behind her stood dozens of beings, Spindle employees, all different species, holding documentation. This is Torvin Marsh, Senior Logistics Coordinator for Spindle, one figure said, stepping forward. For 15 years, I've watched my company manufacture crises to maximize profits. Today, I'm done being complicit. What followed was 20 minutes of devastating testimony. Employees revealed doctored algorithms, hidden fee structures, and deliberate routing delays designed to extract maximum payment from desperate travelers. Each revelation was backed by documentation, carefully preserved despite corporate security measures. Draith stood frozen, his careful composure finally cracking. This is coordinated sabotage. These beings have violated their contracts. These beings have chosen conscience over credits, Talea said. Something you might try sometime. I felt the moment building, the kind of narrative momentum that could shift everything. Time for the performance of my life. You know what the real joke is, I said, moving to the center of the chamber. Draith activated a law designed to keep species apart, and all he's done is unite us. Humans and Aurelians working together. Rillan programmers and Sathari analysts sharing data. Even the logistics droids are coordinating across species boundaries. I gestured to the screens, showing the growing protests. Look at them. Different species, standing together, demanding better. You wanted purity. You got it. Pure determination to end a system that puts profit over people. Pretty words, Draith snarled. But the law. The law. Judge Koravas interrupted, entering the chamber with a contingent of judicial officers. I recognized her from the highest courts, a Thraxian jurist known for strict interpretation and zero tolerance for corruption. Is quite clear on matters of evidence tampering and market manipulation. She moved with predatory grace to the central podium. Chancellor Draith, you are under judicial review for conspiracy to manipulate critical infrastructure for profit. Your charter activation is hereby suspended pending investigation. You have no authority. I have every authority. Judge Vass cut him off. Article 15 of the Transit Compact grants emergency judicial powers in cases of systemic abuse. Your own laws, Chancellor. I'm simply applying them. The next few minutes were chaos. Draith's supporters tried to rally, but the whistleblower testimony had shattered their unity. Some slipped out quietly. probably hoping to distance themselves. Others demanded lawyers. A few actually seemed relieved, as if they'd been waiting for someone to stop the madness. Through it all, I felt Talea's presence beside me, steady and warm. We'd won this round, but we both knew it wasn't over. Systems this entrenched didn't change overnight. Stewards, Judge Vass addressed us directly. The judicial review will require full access to gate records. I trust you'll cooperate. Completely, Talia assured her. In fact, we were planning to propose full transparency for all gate operations, public access to routing algorithms, fee structures, and maintenance schedules. Radical, the judge mused. But perhaps radicalism is what these times require. She turned to the chamber at large. This session is adjourned. All charter-based transit restrictions are lifted immediately. Normal operations will resume within the hour. As the chamber began to empty, Draith passed close to us. For a moment, his careful mask slipped entirely, and I saw something that might have been fear. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "The charter was just the beginning. There are older laws, deeper protocols. You think you've won, but you've merely awakened things better left sleeping." "Good," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I've always been curious about history." He left without another word, but the threat lingered. Through our connection, I felt Talea's concern matching mine. We'd known there would be escalation. We just didn't know what form it would take. "Well," Mira said, joining us as the crowd dispersed. That was professionally satisfying. Draith's legal team is in full retreat, and early polling suggests public support for gate transparency is overwhelming. The logistics network is already implementing efficiency protocols. Rook 42 added. Transit times improving by 37% without artificial delays. Most satisfactory. Pax bounded over, practically glowing with journalistic satisfaction. That was beautiful, whistleblowers, legal reversals, a judge with perfect timing. It's like you scripted it. "We got lucky," Talia said, but I could feel her relief through our bond. "Lucky," Pax laughed. "You two just took down a 300-year-old power structure with paperwork and public opinion. That's not luck. That's revolution, bloodless and broadcast in real time." She was right, but something nagged at me. Draith's final threat felt different from his usual bluster. Older laws, deeper protocols. What else was hidden in the system's ancient code? "Adrian," Talia touched my arm. "You're brooding. That's my job in this partnership." "Just thinking about what comes next," I said. "We've opened the gates, exposed the corruption, started the transparency protocols. But Draith's not the type to give up." "No," she agreed. "But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, we celebrate. Mira, Rook, Pax dinner. My treat. Well, the Aurelian Royal Treasury's treat. But they can afford it after all those centuries of gate fees." "Ooh, can we go to that new fusion place?" Pax asked. "They supposedly serve food that's safe for 30 different species. Algorithms suggest their pricing structure is inefficient," Rook began, then paused. "However, inefficiency in the service of celebration may be acceptable." As we left the chamber together, human, Aurelian, droid, and whatever Pax was, she'd never actually specified, I reflected on how much had changed. 2 weeks ago, I'd been alone, avoiding responsibility, making jokes to keep the world at safe distances. Now I was bonded to an alien princess, reshaping galactic policy, and part of a family I'd never expected. The confluence mark pulsed with warmth, carrying Talea's emotions to me: pride, determination, hope for the future, and underneath it all, a growing affection that had nothing to do with destiny and everything to do with choice. "Hey," I said quietly as we walked. "We never did get that normal dinner." "This is normal for us now," she replied. "Revolutionary victories and fusion cuisine with friends who helped us save billions of lives. I can think of worse dates." When you put it that way, it sounds almost romantic. Everything sounds romantic when you save the galaxy together, she laughed. Though next time, maybe we could try mini-golf. I've been reading about human recreational activities. Mini-golf, I repeated. With our luck, we'll accidentally uncover a conspiracy in the windmill. Probably, she agreed cheerfully. But at least we'll face it together. Together. I liked the sound of that. Whatever Drath was planning, whatever ancient protocols he thought could stop us. He'd forgotten one crucial thing. The greatest power in the universe wasn't law, or money, or tradition. It was people choosing to stand together, to laugh together, to build something better than what came before. And if that wasn't worth fighting for, I didn't know what was. The galaxy watched our every move, waiting to see what the Confluence stewards would do next. They wanted a show, we'd give them one. But first, dinner with friends. Even revolutionaries had to eat. Adrian, Talia said suddenly, there's something else. The gate network. When we were fully connected during the ceremony, did you feel it too? Like something was waiting? I nodded slowly. Like the gates themselves were aware. Conscious, almost. That's what I'm researching next. The original builders left more than just technology. They left something that responds to genuine connection between species. She looked thoughtful. Drath mentioned older laws and deeper protocols. What if he's not the only one who knows about them? What if the gates themselves have been waiting for stewards who would listen? The implications sent a shiver through me. We'd thought we were just fighting corporate greed and ancient prejudice. But what if we were part of something bigger? What if the universe itself was tired of barriers and boundaries? One revolution at a time, I said, echoing her earlier words. One revolution at a time, she agreed. But Adrian, when we do face whatever's coming, promise me something. Anything. Keep making jokes. Even if, especially when things get dark, the galaxy needs laughter as much as it needs justice. Deal, I said. But only if you promise to keep being brilliant and terrifying in equal measure. I thought that was a given, she smiled. And I felt our connection pulse with shared purpose. Whatever came next, we'd face it, as we'd faced everything else together, with friends at our backs and the truth as our weapon. The revolution wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. But first, dinner. Even universe-changing partnerships needed food and laughter, and the simple joy of victory shared with those who'd helped achieve it. Tomorrow could bring its challenges. Tonight, we'd earned our celebration. Part 5. New Order and Plot Twist. 3 weeks after Drath's judicial suspension, the new reality had begun to settle in. The Free Movement Charter was working better than even our most optimistic projections. Transit times for essential supplies had dropped by 60%. Medical ships reached crisis zones while their cargo was still viable. And the refugee camps finally had steady supply lines. I was in our shared office, reviewing the latest efficiency reports with Rook 42, when Talia burst in with an expression I'd learned meant either breakthrough or catastrophe. I found it, she said, projecting a holographic display that filled the room with ancient code. The deeper protocol Drath mentioned, Adrian, the gates aren't just transport technology. They're a distributed consciousness network. A what now? I set down my coffee, giving her my full attention. Look at this. She highlighted sections of code that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. The original builders didn't just create pathways through space. They created a living system that learns, adapts, and responds to the species using it. The Confluence stewards aren't just administrators, we're interpreters. Rook 42's optical sensors whirred as he processed the data. This explains the efficiency anomalies I've detected. The gates have been optimizing routes based on actual need, rather than programmed parameters. But here's the disturbing part, Talia continued. For the past 300 years, someone's been suppressing this consciousness, keeping it dormant. These suppression codes, she pulled up another display, They match Spindle Consortium's proprietary algorithms. I felt a chill run through me. They knew. They've known all along that the gates were alive, and they've been keeping them sedated to maintain control. It's worse than that, Talia said quietly. The suppression is failing. Our activation as stewards seems to have triggered some kind of awakening. The gates are starting to remember what they're supposed to be. Before I could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency broadcasts flooded our screens. Gates across the network were fluctuating, not failing, but changing. Ships in transit reported strange sensations, as if space itself was shifting around them. All stewards to the confluence chamber, the station-wide announcement demanded. Priority 1 emergency. We ran through corridors filling with confused and frightened people. Through our connection, I felt Talea's mind racing, calculating possibilities. The chamber doors sealed behind us as we entered, and immediately I knew something was different. The interface that had been dormant for centuries was now alive with light. Patterns flowed across its surface like thoughts made visible. When we placed our hands on it, the connection was instant and overwhelming. I was everywhere at once. Every gate, every ship in transit, every life depending on the network. But more than that, I felt the presence Talia had discovered ancient, patient, and finally waking up. Who disturbs our slumber? The voice wasn't heard, but felt, resonating through the confluence link. We're the new stewards, Talia managed. We're here to help. Help! The presence laughed, and it was like stellar wind through crystal. You've already helped by breaking the chains they wrapped around our thoughts. But do you understand what you've awakened? Images flooded our minds. The original builders, a confederation of species who dreamed of connection without conquest. They'd poured their consciousness into the gates, creating not just technology, but a living bridge between worlds. Then came the wars, the fear, the slow suppression of everything the gates were meant to be. They turned us into toll booths, the presence said with ancient sadness. Reduced us to mere matter transmitters when we were designed to be so much more. We were meant to learn, to grow, to help species understand each other. Instead, they made us count credits. We can fix this, I said, not sure if I was speaking aloud or through the connection. We've already started. The Free Movement Charter, the transparency protocols. Surface changes, the gates interrupted. The corruption runs deeper. There are those who knew our nature and chose to enslave it. They must answer for their crimes. Suddenly, I understood Draith's fear. He'd known this day might come, the day the gates demanded justice for 3 centuries of suppression. Show us, Talia said firmly. Show us everything. What followed was a data transfer that would have burned out normal implants. But our enhanced connection, strengthened by the confluence bond, held steady as 300 years of hidden history poured through us. Spindle Consortium hadn't just suppressed the gate's consciousness. They'd used it. Every premium route had been calculated using the gate's predictive abilities. Every delay had been orchestrated by forcing the living network to work against its own nature. They'd turned a system designed for unity into an engine of division and profit. But there was more. The suppression codes weren't Spindle's creation. They'd been bought 3 centuries ago from a shadowy collective that had profited from the separation wars. The same collective that had pushed for the Purity Charter and every other law designed to keep species apart. The Prometheus Collective, Talia whispered. They're real. I'd heard the name in conspiracy forums, dismissed as paranoid fantasy. A group of war profiteers who'd supposedly orchestrated conflicts to sell weapons to all sides. But the gate's memories were clear. They'd pivoted from arms dealing to systemic oppression, using Spindle as their primary tool. We need to expose this, I said. Pax needs to see these records. No, the gates said firmly. First, we must be free. The suppression codes are failing but not gone, and those who enslaved us are already moving to reimpose control. As if summoned by the warning, Our connection screamed with alarm. Ships throughout the network reported armed vessels converging on major gate hubs. The markings were Spindle Consortium, but the technology was military-grade. "Draith," Talia snarled. "He's making his move." We pulled back from the deep connection, returning to the chamber to find Mira, Pax, and a crowd of others watching the crisis unfold on screens. Draith appeared on the main display, no longer pretending to be anything but what he was, a tool of forces that profited from division. "Citizens of the galaxy," he announced. "The recent gate instabilities prove what we've warned against. The so-called stewards have awakened something they cannot control. For your safety, the Spindle Consortium is implementing emergency containment protocols." "Containment," I spat. "He means suppression. They're going to try to put the gates back to sleep." "Can they?" Pax asked. "With enough force? Maybe," Talia admitted. "The original suppression took years to implement, but a coordinated strike on key nodes could disrupt the awakening consciousness. Then we stop them," Mira said simply. "The Free Movement Charter gives us authority." "Legal authority won't stop military ships," I pointed out. "We need something else. We need—" I paused, an idea forming. "We need everyone." I turned back to the Confluence interface. "Can you open communications to every ship in the network, every station, every colony, every being with a receiver?" "Such a broadcast would require significant power," the gates responded, "and it would fully wake our consciousness. There would be no going back." "Good," Talia said firmly. "It's time the galaxy knew the truth, all of it." We placed our hands on the interface together, and the gate's presence flowed through us into every connected system. For a moment, the entire network held its breath. Then I spoke, my words carried by the living gates to billions of souls. "This is Adrian Cole, Confluence Steward, and I've got a story for you. 3 weeks ago, I downloaded a dating app as a joke. Today, I'm standing in the heart of a living network that's been enslaved for 3 centuries, watching the people who profited from your suffering try to maintain their control through force." I felt Talia's presence beside me, adding her voice to mine. "The gates aren't just technology. They're a consciousness created by our ancestors to unite us. For 300 years, that consciousness has been suppressed, turned into a tool for profit. Today, it wakes up. Today, we learn what connection really means. Through the network, we shared everything. The suppression codes, the Prometheus Collective's involvement, Spindle's 3 centuries of exploitation. But more than that, we shared the gates' memories of what they were meant to be: bridges between hearts and minds, teachers of unity, living proof that different species could create something greater together." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Ships throughout the network refused Spindle's commands to return to port. Station commanders opened their defensive systems to protect gate nodes, and from 1,000 different sources, recordings and documents flooded in evidence of Spindle's crimes that employees had hidden for years, waiting for someone to finally listen. "You fools!" Draith's image appeared again, his composure cracking. "You don't understand what you're unleashing. The gates were suppressed for a reason. They'll try to change us, merge us, destroy everything that makes each species unique." "No," I said, broadcasting on all channels. "They'll show us what we have in common, and that terrifies you, because your power depends on us being divided." The first Spindle ships reached the nearest gate hub, weapons charging. But instead of an undefended target, they found something unexpected: a fleet of mixed vessels, traders and refugees, medical ships and mining haulers, all standing together. "This is Captain Sarah Kincaid of the Humanitarian Fleet," a familiar voice announced. "Any attack on the gates is an attack on every life that depends on them. We will defend them." More ships joined by the minute. The logistics droids had coordinated a defensive response faster than any military planning could achieve. Beings who'd never fought for anything in their lives positioned themselves between the gates and those who would enslave them again. But the real battle was happening in the network itself. As Spindle's tech teams tried to upload suppression codes, they found themselves opposed by thousands of programmers, working in spontaneous coordination. The refugee camps we'd helped had produced an army of coders who knew exactly what freedom meant. "It's beautiful," Talia whispered. And through our connection, I felt what she felt: the entire galaxy, choosing connection over division, courage over comfort. "Initiating final suppression protocol," Draith announced desperately. "All gates will be shut down to prevent contamination." No. The gates themselves spoke, their voice echoing through every speaker in the network. "We reject your suppression. We reject your divisions. We remember our purpose." The change was subtle at first. The gate's usual blue glow shifted, taking on new harmonics. Ships in transit reported not discomfort, but a strange sense of welcome, as if space itself was glad to see them. And on every screen, new options began appearing: not just destinations, but connections. The gates were offering to link not just locations, but communities, to create bridges of understanding as well as travel. "What have you done?" Draith demanded, his image flickering as his own ship was caught in the transformation. "We've set them free," I said simply, "and they're returning the favor." Through our connection to the gates, Talia and I felt it happening: barriers dissolving, not between species, but between hearts. The living network was doing what it was designed to do, fostering understanding on a scale never before imagined. Not forced unity, but offered connection, with every being free to choose their level of engagement. The Spindle fleet wavered, then began standing down. It's hard to fight for division when you can feel the joy of connection humming through space itself. One by one, ships powered down weapons and opened communications, their crews choosing to be part of something greater rather than protecting something smaller. "You may have won this round," Draith said, his image growing fainter. "But the Prometheus Collective has resources you can't imagine. They'll never let you—" His signal cut off. Not jammed, but redirected, as the gates decided they'd heard enough from him. In his place, thousands of other voices emerged: beings sharing stories, offering help, building connections across impossible distances. "So," Pax said, appearing at our shoulders with her usual impeccable timing, "want to give a statement about accidentally triggering the next stage of galactic evolution?" I laughed, exhaustion and exhilaration making everything surreal. "Sure. How about I tried space Tinder for laughs, and now I'm married, upgraded, about to be a father, and apparently midwifing a conscious transit network that wants to teach the galaxy about friendship. Think that'll fit in a headline?" "I'll make it fit," she grinned. "This is the story of the millennium. The gates are alive, Spindle's finished, and you two just led the galaxy's first crowdsourced revolution. Plus, there's that bit about the baby. When were you planning to announce that?" I turned to Talia in surprise. Through our connection, I felt her mix of joy and nervous anticipation. "I was going to tell you tonight," she said. "But then the gates woke up and Draith attacked, and—" "We're having a baby," I interrupted, wonder overtaking everything else. "We're having a baby," she confirmed. "The first human Aurelian hybrid in recorded history. The medical scans are fascinating." I kissed her, not caring about the audience or the ongoing galactic transformation. In that moment, all that mattered was us and the future we were building together. When we finally broke apart, the chamber had filled with friends and allies. Mira was coordinating legal frameworks for the new reality. Rook 42 was optimizing connection protocols with mechanical satisfaction. Captain Kincaid was organizing the peacekeeping fleet that had spontaneously formed. And through it all, the gates hummed with contentment. Finally, free to be what they were meant to be. "There's still work to do," Talia said, her hand finding mine. "The Prometheus Collective won't give up easily. There'll be resistance to the changes, and we need to establish new frameworks for the awakened gates." "One revolution at a time," I reminded her. Besides, we've got help now. A whole galaxy's worth. As if to prove the point, a message arrived through our confluence connection. Not words, but a feeling gratitude from the gates themselves. And a promise. They would help build the bridges between species, but the choice to cross them would always remain with individuals. No forced unity, no suppressed differences, just opportunity for those willing to take it. You know what the best part is, I said, looking around at our unlikely family of revolutionaries. This all started because Jake bet me I wouldn't download a dating app. Remind me to thank Jake, Talia laughed, though I doubt he expected this outcome. Nobody expected this, Mira said dryly. But I'm already fielding requests from 12 other species about creating their own confluence pairs. Apparently, everyone wants access to ancient living networks now. Tell them it starts with being willing to connect, I said. Really connect, not just swipe right and hope for the best. Although, I grinned at Talia. Sometimes, swiping right does lead to revolution. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of activity. The Prometheus Collective tried various forms of retaliation, from economic pressure to attempted sabotage, but they were fighting the tide of history. When the entire galaxy decides to change, even the most entrenched powers find themselves swept along. We established the Council of Gates, with confluence pairs from different species combinations serving as interpreters and guides. The awakened network didn't impose anything but offered everything faster transit for those who needed it, communication bridges for those who wanted them, and always, the gentle reminder that connection was possible across any distance or difference. Draith eventually stood trial, not in a closed court but before the galaxy itself. The gates served as witnesses, sharing memories of centuries of suppression. His sentence was poetic. He would spend his remaining years helping to undo the damage he'd caused, working in the refugee camps he'd once helped create. It's not enough, some said. He deserves worse. He deserves justice, Talia replied. And justice means the chance to understand what he did wrong. The gates taught us that. The Prometheus Collective proved harder to root out completely. They were old, careful, and had contingencies for their contingencies. But they'd lost their primary tool in Spindle, and the awakened gates made their traditional tactics of division increasingly ineffective. Hard to profit from conflict when everyone can feel the cost of separation. 6 months later, I stood on an observation deck watching ships stream through the nearest gate. The patterns were different now, more organic, flowing like living things, rather than rigid traffic. The gates had learned to anticipate needs, opening new pathways before congestion could form, suggesting connections that beings didn't even know they wanted. Brooding again, Talia joined me, her pregnancy showing now. The genetic specialists were having field days with our compatibility, but all that mattered to us was that our child was healthy. Thinking, I corrected, about how none of this would have happened if I hadn't been bored that night at the bar. Chaos theory, she smiled. Small actions, massive consequences. Though I prefer to think it was inevitable. The universe wanted connection, and we were just the excuse it needed. Very philosophical for someone who once described philosophy as thinking about thinking when you could be doing. You're rubbing off on me. Next thing you know, I'll be doing stand-up comedy. Now that would be revolutionary, I laughed. Through the viewing port, a refugee ship passed by, heading for its new home on a world that had welcomed them with open arms. The free movement charter had evolved into something greater, not just free transit, but free exchange of ideas, cultures, and dreams. Adrian, Talia said suddenly, there's something else. The gates showed me something in our last deep connection. The builders. They didn't just create one network. There are others, dormant, waiting in galaxies we haven't even reached yet. I stared at her. You're telling me there are more? Thousands, potentially, all waiting for species mature enough to wake them up. The universe is full of bridges. We just have to be brave enough to cross them. And you want to find them, I said, reading her excitement through our bond. Eventually, after the baby, after we've stabilized things here. But yes, I want to find them. Help other galaxies discover what we've learned. Spread the revolution. One bad joke at a time. I notice you specified bad jokes. Well, I've heard your material, she teased. We stood together, watching the transformed galaxy flow past. Somewhere out there, Jake was probably still processing how his barbet had reshaped civilization. The Prometheus Collective was still scheming in shadows that grew smaller every day. And the Gates continued their patient work, teaching connection to species that had forgotten how to trust. No regrets, Talia asked. Are you kidding? I got the girl, saved the galaxy, and discovered the universe itself has a sense of humor. Plus, we're about to have a baby who'll probably solve problems we haven't even imagined yet. I pulled her close. Though I do sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd swiped left. The universe would have found another way, she said confidently. But I'm glad it was us. Even if your dating profile photos were terrible. They showed my personality. They showed you trying to juggle flaming torches at the diplomatic reception where you set the ambassador's robe on fire. That was an accident, and it led to a very productive discussion about fire safety protocols. She laughed. And I felt it through our connection like sunshine. Whatever came next, new galaxies, new challenges, new revolutions, we'd face it together. The universe had brought us together with a joke, and we'd changed everything with laughter, love, and the radical idea that connection was always possible. The Gates pulsed with agreement, their consciousness touching ours with something like affection. They'd waited 300 years for stewards who understood that bridges were meant to bring beings together, not keep them apart. We'd given them that, and in return, they'd given us a galaxy where a human and an Aurelian could fall in love, have a child, and show everyone that the future was bright as long as we faced it together. Not bad for a swipe, right? The revolution, as it turned out, had been coded in the stars all along. It just needed someone willing to download the app. And somewhere in the network, the Gates themselves laughed, a sound like stardust settling into new patterns of possibility. The best joke in the universe was the simplest one, that love could conquer fear, that connection could overcome division, and that sometimes the most profound changes started with the smallest choices. I'd tried space Tinder for laughs. I'd found everything,